Welcome back to Living Green. I'm your host, Kimon Kotos, and I'm here with Paul Keiser of Agriculture and Health Alive. And Paul, when we last left the audience, we were talking about the importance of the soil and CSAs, community supported agriculture. Let's talk a little bit about how a lot of these movements have grown out of not only back to the land, but really respecting the health of the soil and giving thankfulness to the land that we live on. Years ago, actually going back to 1979 for myself, I studied biodynamic agriculture and biodynamic farming, or gardening as they used to call it. And in the early 70s, I was a sprout producer. And so it was kind of a new thing being an urban hydroponic farmer. But it was at a time when people were starting to get back to the land and think about natural foods and organic foods. Can you talk a little bit about Rudolf Steiner and the whole movement with biodynamic gardening and how that's really done a lot to enrich the soil?
Well, Rudolf Steiner passed away in 26 in there, I think 1926, I think it was. But in 1924, he was a PhD in physics, I think, something like that, and also a clairvoyant like Christ and the apostles and Buddha and many of the great people are clairvoyant. They see things without the senses. And he gave a lecture to a group of farmers in Central Europe. In 24, it was 8 lectures at the estate of a count and countess. And these farmers were concerned. They were seeing a decline in fertility and a decline in the health of animals and the growth of the plants. And this was from industrialization. And of course, there'd been a big war there as well. And so they wondered what was going on with their fertility. And so he gave them ways in these 8 lectures to make their own fertility themselves from the things in their area, in the region. And it's basically a group of preparations that you make yourself and use some of its herbs, some of its silicon powder, some of its cow manure, and you make them yourselves through different processes, things that he knew. And composting is part of it. There's 6 of them that go in the compost pile. And I'm sure, and he said that the trace elements are in dilute amounts in the atmosphere. And I'm sure that these preparations bring the trace elements right out of the atmosphere into the compost pile. And there's probably a couple million acres in Australia where the land had its fertility returned to it through biodynamics. And Alex Podolinsky has been one of the biodynamic leaders there. And Hugh Lovell has recently gone there, and he was located in Georgia before that. And he's speaking at the Acres USA conference in December down in Indianapolis. And then the leader in New Zealand was Peter Proctor, the head of the Biodynamic Farming Association there. And he is now, working full-time in India. And so he's just all over the place, working with hundreds of farmers, traveling through the villages and through the different institutes and things like that.
Well, we talked before about mass farming and large agricultural developments. The impact of that type of large-scale farming is beyond what the average consumer really comes to recognize, other than sometimes that they see things, well, there's fruit that's picked too early, or the flavor's missing, or somehow the food doesn't taste like it used to 20, 30 years ago. These are cumulative effects of how we've altered our soil and even the food that we take for granted that we eat, whether it be tomatoes or other vegetables, that somehow something has changed, but we still see plenty of them in the marketplace, but they just don't taste the same.
And they're pretty. They're pretty in the marketplace. They're pretty piled up in some of the markets. But they're for travel and they're for storage. They're built for, like to survive a truck crash or something like that. The tomatoes came out okay. The driver got killed, but the tomatoes were okay. This type of thing. Or maybe even a plane crash, to survive a plane crash. But as far as nutrition goes and flavor goes, we mostly have to grow that ourselves and have it grown by farmer friends in the area. and we get it locally. And my Uncle Al, my Aunt Amy, they had a garden around 2 parts of the house, and they had a gardener who had a wooden leg when I was a boy in the 40s and early 50s. He took care of the garden, cut the firewood, and did other handyman stuff. While Uncle Al was away at his job, and Aunt Amy would can 60 quarts of everything every summer. And Uncle Al was killed in his early 70s in an auto accident. And when the doctor examined his veins, living on these vegetables year-round, they said that he had the veins of a young person in his body. He was just as healthy as could be. He would have lasted another 20 or 30 years, most likely, if there hadn't been an accident. So these things, and this was canned in the wintertime and spring, and yet the nutrition was in there. Organic tomatoes, coming out of a jar. They've been in the jar for 8 months or something like that. Either spaghetti sauce or whole tomatoes or tomato juice, that type of thing. It's just delicious as can be. The nutrients are still there, and the well-grown foods with good soil fertility, they keep longer as well. Dennis Mackey up at Northern Natural Organics up in Manistee area, they market and produce for 11 certified organic growers across Michigan. He said, spray your fruit trees or your berries 12 times a year with kelp solutions. Kelp has 60 elements in it, and he said the fruit won't rot. Eventually it'll dehydrate, but it will not rot. So these are, I hope I got to what you were looking for.
Well, this is also a big cost and risk to the farmer as well, in terms of whether their produce is viable and can stand up. Mm-hmm. But waxing apples and waxing fruit and vegetables and the various sprays and things that are there to affect the sellability, there used to be an old expression, are you smoking more and enjoying it less? Well, I think that Americans tend to be eating more, but not really sure what they're getting from their food.
The microbes in their body are used to that junk food that they're eating, $1 sandwich at one of these fast food places, $1 French fries, good heavens, and then 20 minutes later your stomach doesn't feel so good, this type of thing. And they're cultivating disease in their bodies. They're not nourishing the whole body, the entire body. The cells have to be fed. The toxins the body's built to eliminate toxins. An animal's body's built to eliminate toxins. The earth was built to overcome toxins. But with the synthetic chemical industries that have been, petro banking has been behind it, and it's just spread all over the whole planet, as Rachel Carson pointed out so well with Silent Spring in 1962. And that is still going on with this oil thing in the Gulf of Mexico is just one example. And that oil evaporates into the clouds. There might be 60 million gallons of oil in the clouds. And the group of Israeli scientists have been studying cloud health, and they said that healthy clouds behave normally. They let their water go when they go up a mountain, or 2 air masses come together in different temperatures and the water falls. But the clouds that have heavy pollution loads are holding their water too long. They're not behaving properly. And I think this is where these deluges are coming, that's causing this flooding, this increasing crescendo that's happening. These clouds don't let the water go at the normal time, and they've got this tremendous load, and out it goes. And
we'll come back to this, but we want you to stay with us here on Living Green, and we'll be back more to talk with Paul Keiser.